Test pas le Wilson, ground floor pour le first floor pour le webcast. Canal anglais, canal 2. Canal anglais le 2.
I call to order distinguished members of the committee, distinguished members of the delegation of the Republic of Ecuador, ladies and gentlemen. I call to order the 632nd meeting of the Committee on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and members of their families. The committee will proceed with agenda item 7, consideration of the report submitted by state parties under the Article 73 of the Convention. Today we will proceed in public dialogue with the consideration of the 4th periodic report of the Republic of Ecuador. On behalf of the committee, allow me first to warmly welcome His Excellency Mr. Saul Pakaruku, Deputy Minister for Human Mobility at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Human Mobility, and the Head of Delegation of the Republic of Ecuador to this constructive dialogue. Allow me also to welcome His Excellency Mr. Marcelo Vasquez, Ambassador Permanent Representative of the Republic of Ecuador to the United Nations and other international organizations in Geneva, as well as the entire members of the delegation of the Republic of Ecuador, which comprises of several experts in the delegation. I would also like to take this opportunity to express our sincere appreciation to the government of Ecuador for positively responding to the request of the committee for accepting to be reviewed in situ with a very high-level delegation, which is in fact a manifestation of the commitment of the state party to the treaty body system as a whole and to the Committee on the Protection of All Migrant Workers and members of their families in particular. In this regard, I also must mention that this committee is fortunate to have the services of one of your experts, former Ambassador Mr. Francisco Carrion Mina is one of the experts elected this time to this committee. Of course, following our rules with regard to independent experts, he is not present in this room but I must say that we are thankful for Ecuador for providing an expert to this committee to assist our work. Excellency, we conduct this dialogue in a spirit of constructive dialogue, which means that we believe that the end of our dialogue in examining the report submitted by your country as well as our conversations with you, that we will arrive at a set of recommendations that will be beneficial for this treaty regime as well as stakeholders and for your country to manifest your commitment towards the migrant workers in your country and migrant workers of the world in general. And Ecuador is a very important country in that scheme of things, of our work. So we are very thankful that you have a very substantial delegation to have this dialogue with this committee. I now have the pleasure and the honor to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Saul Pakaruku, Deputy Minister for Human Mobility and Head of Delegation of the Republic of Ecuador, to introduce the report and to commence this discussion. Excellency, you have the floor. You may wish to introduce your delegation as well.
Thank you, Chair. Buen día a los distinguidos miembros.
Good morning, distinguished committee members. On behalf of the government of Ecuador, I would like to express our appreciation for this opportunity to share our progress and challenges in the implementation of the International Convention on the Protection of All Migrant Workers and members of their families. In my capacity as Vice Minister of Human Mobility and as the head of delegation, I would like to take a moment to introduce you to my team. Ambassador Marcelo Vasquez, Permanent Representative of Ecuador at the United Nations Office and other international organizations in Geneva. Ms. Maria Jose Renteria, General Coordinator of Legal Advisory Services of the Directorate General of Civil Registration, and Ms. Maria Fernanda Guerrero Ruiz, Zone 1 Coordinator of Directorate General for Civil Registration. We also have other colleagues from the permanent mission here. The convention strengthens the commitment of the state of Ecuador to the protection of their nationals and their families abroad, while at the same time providing clear regulatory framework to address and protect the rights of migrant workers living in the country. Ecuador is a country of origin, destination, transit, and return, with more than 2.4 million nationals living abroad, about 500,000 foreign nationals residing in the country, with daily transit flows of persons in situations of mobility. Additionally, Ecuador is one of the countries with the highest number of refugees registered in the region. Historical records are that over 81,000 people as of May 2026. Now, this picture requires specific actions and joint work to guarantee the well-being of all migrant workers and persons in need of international protection, in line with the international commitments taken on by the country. And so Ecuador has a national implementation plan for the Global Compact for Migration 2025-2029. It is the first country in the world to have both national and local approaches, with paying particular attention to the specificities and best practices at each level. The state guarantees the participation of civil society organizations, including migrants' organizations, when drafting, implementing, and following up on migration public policies. And we do this through the National Roundtable on Human Mobility, which brings together central governments, decentralized autonomous governments, international cooperation, academia, the private sector, as well as civil society. And so the role of the autonomous decentralized governments in this regard is essential in integrating migrant workers and members of their families in the development plans and land use planning, and guaranteeing effective access to public services at the local level, including health, education, and housing, regardless of their migration status. The state has adopted instruments such as the Protocol for the Protection of Ecuadorians in Situations of Vulnerability Abroad, also to search for Ecuadorians who have disappeared or are incommunicado, and the repatriation of order remains, among others, which are protection mechanisms to guarantee effective, timely, and high-quality assistance to Ecuadorian migrants. I would like to underscore specifically that Ecuador works on the basis of an orderly, safe, and regular migration, and it does this through circular migration agreements with several countries such as Germany, Australia, Canada, the UAE, Spain, the United States, France, Hungary, Israel, and Italy, in sectors such as agriculture, care work, industry, and services. These are transformative programs, given that the return migrants come back with skills, experience, and a broad perspective that promotes the development of their communities. In the area of integration of persons in human mobility, we highlight the coordinated work of Ecuadorian state with actors such as the International Organization for Migration, UNHCR, and the ILO, with a significant presence in the territory. It has made it possible to have projects and initiatives that include migrants in their host communities. During the pro tempore presidency of the Quito process in 2025, we concluded the regional socioeconomic integration strategy around the following pillars: 1, mobility, international protection, regularization; 2, social cohesion and family inclusion; and 3, decent work and social cohesion. Between 2019 and 2025, the state of Ecuador has spearheaded various extraordinary regularization processes with the aim of providing legal stability to the migrant population, investing significant public resources in this. So we have granted more than 104,000 visas and had a communication campaigns along with the IOM and UNHCR in order to reach the target population to address the FAQs and highlight benefits of regularization process. In the area of labor and socioeconomic inclusion policies, the Ministry of Labor has implemented various services to facilitate access to the labor market and to build on the skills and capabilities of people in human mobility. The Public Employment Service facilitates effective and timely link between labor supply and labor demand through inclusive selection processes. And with the support of these agencies, UNHCR and the ILO, a specific session online website was created to provide employers and workers with information on fair recruitment and inclusive selection processes. And so in this regard, the state of Ecuador guarantees equal treatment for migrant workers and their families in labor matters through a legal framework that prohibits discrimination and ensures equal rights. With regard to access to education, the state of Ecuador, endowed with the Constitution of the Republic and the organic law on intercultural education, guarantees access to education for all children and adolescents in situations of human mobility, following the principle of equality of rights and duties. The state has implemented specific measures to prevent sexual violence and exploitation in the educational settings, particularly targeting migrant girls through the development of a regulatory strategic framework. Protocols and pathways have been issued with basic rights-based approach, which must be activated in response to any psychosocial risk or situation of violence detected or committed within the educational system. With regard to the protection of children and adolescents, Ecuador has a protocol for the protection of Ecuadorians in vulnerability abroad. Its goal is to provide assistance, coordination, and support with competent national bodies and foreign local authorities in order to ensure the respect of their rights. May I proceed? The state has implemented a normative framework for the protection of unaccompanied or separated migrant children and adolescents based on the principle of determining their best interest. It is prohibited to subject this population to inadmissibility procedure to impose administrative sanctions that would result in family separation or return to dangerous places, thereby requiring migration authorities to allow the regular entry. With regard to protection measures for migrant women through its diplomatic missions and consular offices, specific measures have been adopted in order to strengthen the protection of Ecuadorians living abroad, with paying particular attention to the prevention of gender violence, feminicide, and arbitrary detention. In order to guarantee consular assistance, support, and guidance on issues related to gender-based violence, we have had training and awareness-raising activities through workshops and informational talks aimed at the Ecuadorian community. The goal is to improve knowledge on rights and the possible ways and avenues available to report abuses in violation of these guarantees. The Constitution and various additional laws guarantee gender equality in the labor sphere, recognizing women's rights to have access to employment, training, professional promotion, and remuneration in equal conditions. And regarding actions to combat human trafficking and smuggling of migrants, Ecuador has also strengthened its legal and institutional framework with an approach based on prevention, protection, prosecution, and cooperation. We have enacted key laws and instruments such as the Action Plan to Combat Trafficking in Persons, the Organic Law Against Trafficking in Persons and Smuggling Migrants, and various reforms to the Comprehensive Organic Criminal Code. Likewise, the Interinstitutional Coordination Committee for the Prevention of Trafficking in Persons and Smuggling of Migrants and the Protection of Victims develops and implements public policies in 4 areas: prevention and promotion of rights, assistance and protection, investigation and prosecution, and lastly, governance. Along these lines, important measures have been adopted in order to strengthen the detailed collection of data on cases of trafficking in persons, using differentiated intersectional approaches in the design of public policies that are evidence-based. Among the progress made in the recent period, we have the launch of an interactive map on trafficking and smuggling. It is a digital tool that is constantly being updated, and it allows us to visualize this information through various maps, charts, and graphs. In conclusion, the state of Ecuador would like to reaffirm its unwavering commitment to the full attainment of the rights of migrant workers and members of their families, in accordance with the terms established by the Convention and other international human rights instruments that the country has signed and ratified. The progress we have made and spoken about is not an end, but rather simply proof of sustained political will and institutional capacity to transform normative commitments into specific action. Ecuador is a state that has experienced all the dimensions of migration as a country of origin, of transit, and destination. And it is this experience that compels us to address this phenomenon with the seriousness, level-headedness, and sensitivity that it deserves. We deeply appreciate the constructive dialogue with the committee, whose observations are, for us, a tool that allows us to continuously improve. We undertake to follow up closely to the recommendations arising from this session in order to fully comply with the convention. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Pakuruku, Deputy Minister for Human Mobility and Head of Delegation of the Republic of Ecuador, to this constructive dialogue, for his introductory statement. Excellency, the procedure for consideration of the report will be as follows. Questions will be asked first by the two candidate rapporteurs, to be followed by other members of the committee. You, as well as delegation members as delegated by you, will then provide their responses to the country rapporteurs and to the other members for their questions. And if time allows, additional questions will be asked, followed up by responses. And of course, we need time management in terms to have a complete dialogue, complete constructive dialogue. So I encourage your delegation and delegation members to provide precise and correct, direct answers to in response to the committee members' questions. I now call upon the rapporteurs to start the questions for this dialogue under the various articles of the convention. We have two rapporteurs, Mr. Muhammad Sharif and Mr. Edgar Koso Sosa. I call upon Sharif to have the floor first. Sharif, you have the floor.
Merci infiniment, Monsieur le Président.
Many thanks, Chair. Vice Minister of Human Mobility, Head of Delegation, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Delegation of Ecuador, dear friends and colleagues. To begin, I would like to say how grateful we are for this opportunity to have a dialogue with you, which we hope will be fruitful, open, constructive. As was pointed out by the chair of our committee, this fruitful dialogue, this positive interaction with your delegation is enriching both for you and for us. Certainly, it will make our job much easier, especially having heard what the Vice Minister just said, who has said that you work with seriousness and integrity in the country, and that's really laudable. Our approach on migration, development, public policies in the area, our questions, our reactions, our comments, our observations, concluding observations on the periodic reports, solely seek to assess the situation of migration and, if necessary, provide new information about the quality of public policy in this area, and to understand the level of progress made in the implementation of the convention and how it impacts the situation of migrants in your country. Personally, I learned a great deal having worked with my colleague, Professor Edgar Sosa, on your report. I, with all due humility, recognize that unlike my colleague, my knowledge of your country comes from visits to your country, and though I come from South Africa, from the South, but different part of the continent, and from classes that I took in Latin America a long time ago. Having read this official document, I read up on the geography of your country, the history, the culture, the literature of your country, which is quite rich, and migration from, to, and through Ecuador. I did my research, looked into academic documents, I listened to statements in order to really understand the reality of migration in Ecuador. We all know that the question of migration in this sub-region is a complicated one, and it has many challenges, namely due to the lack of data, and I'll have a question on this later, the poor control and management at the borders, changes in migration flows, the rise in violence, murder rates, trafficking in persons. And I noted with satisfaction that despite the size of this report and the many challenges, domestic difficulties, social, economic, and political issues, the many things that you have to face, in spite of this, Ecuador, with determination, started great projects in order to protect the rights of migrants, and you have put a great deal of effort in this. Congratulations for that. And I note with satisfaction that Ecuador has joined a great number of regional and international instruments on human rights. Your country, as I just said, is making great efforts to have efficient collaboration with countries in the Latin American continent in general, and with those in the subregion specifically. One of the pioneering countries for the Marrakesh Compact, which we just mentioned, and you did, it is one of the countries leading Marrakesh, and also you led the Quito process in order to coordinate the responses of countries in the region to the Venezuelan crisis. Between 2019 and 2025, you organized several regularization campaigns. I don't know exactly how many people benefited from this, but in 2019, it was 50,000, and I don't know what the figures are for the years after that. I know with satisfaction that just last week, actually, your country participated in a meeting in Santiago de Chile with Peru, Bolivia, and Colombia. Venezuela was absent, though, on migration and borders. Here in Geneva, recently you presented the national plan for implementing the Marrakesh Plan, which has 15 of the 23 goals of the covenant on 3 main pillars, which were economic inclusion, social inclusion, governance, and migration. Clearly note your resolve to be a spearheading influence in migration policy. And I'll say it again, spearheading this effort. This brings a great deal of joy to our committee. And as you have noted, we adopted General Observation 6 on conversion protection of the rights of all migrant workers and members of their families by the Convention and Global Compact on Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration. And as was said by your special envoy for the Forum to Review Migration, Madam Catalina de Vandes, who said, the new plan of Ecuador is not just a significant step for the country, Ecuador, but also a model to emulate for other countries. You also try to change or turn UN commitments into public policies. We congratulate you for that resolve, while appreciating the work done by your country in defending human rights in general. And I really like the title that you mentioned, Vice Minister, human mobility. You didn't say migration, you said human mobility. And that's the right way to speak about this. We will have some general questions for you, but before I do that, I would like to point out that our committee supports good initiatives. And while respecting our prerogatives, we will make available our expertise in order to consolidate the protection of all migrant workers and members of their families. My first question then relates to what I just mentioned, your plan. As you're trying to turn international commitments into specific actions on the ground, you put together this plan. The Vice Minister just spoke about this, working in collaboration with several stakeholders, addressing the daily life of migrants. And I know that this comes from various consultations, but who are the stakeholders involved in the implementation of this 5-year plan? Who are those participating in this? You spoke that it has several levels. You spoke national level, but also regional level. Who is involved at that regional level? Also, is there any assessment of its effectiveness so far? If so, and even though it has been up and running for just a short time, what are the challenges, limitations, and first lessons that you have drawn from this experience? The second question regards the implementation of the streamlined, homogeneous public policies that rely on trustworthy, harmonized data in keeping with national laws that would allow you to have relevant results and draw credible comparisons. I confess to you that it's very difficult for me to find figures in your report about your country. So as you know, data, high quality data are essential to avoid taking risky, perilous decisions and to have well-informed decisions. And note that detailed, complicated data are required, specifically in the area of migration. And what's more, if it's irregular migration or for people in transit, the data are very important. We need broken down data to facilitate the implementation of targeted measures to address migration. And we need that data. It's not easy to see from your, because we believe that there's a shortcoming of data, not just in your country, but in the region. So what is being done in order to address the shortage of data And since you are one of the pioneers of the Marrakesh Compact, one of the recommendations of the 23 goals is to have trustworthy data, statistics. Question about socioeconomic situation, environment, climate raises several questions. Various Ecuadorians, and you spoke of 2.6 million, many have tried to internally displace in order to leave high-risk areas. And perhaps traveling internationally, taking on great risks, and they go to the US or Spain, sometimes Italy, sometimes even Switzerland, hoping to find employment opportunities and to regularize their situation. Then immigration seems as a solution to address difficulties, to flee insecurity, uncertainty, and fear. Could you please provide trustworthy, validated, relevant data on the number of people leaving, how this has changed over time, broken down by age, where have they gone geographically, what countries have they settled in? Because as I said, the countries that we have are not clearly accessible. So if you have that for us, we would really appreciate it. Also, what is your country doing in order to implement appropriate public policies to address not just the migration challenges of Ecuadorians living abroad, but also to involve the diaspora in the development process? Where is your consular service distributed geographically in order to assist your nationals abroad? How are they distributed in terms of the countries that your nationals migrate to? And what measures have been taken in order to improve the consular protection services of Ecuadorian migrants and their families abroad in general, and in the United States specifically, where the current context, where the American government has not just closed the main ways to be granted asylum and protection. I'm thinking about some of the mechanisms that have been created recently, but also they increased border security on the border with Mexico. And many foreigners have been expelled with sometimes violent conditions by restraining them, sending them to third countries, and separating them from their families. So in this context, your country is facing the return of some of these nationals that have been sent back from the US, which doubtless represents a logistic and humanitarian challenge of the greatest scale. Perhaps providing them assistance right away, psychological support, medical support, social reinsertion, and economic reintegration would be a priority. All of us remember the attempts of the US forces to enter by force the consular office of Ecuador last January, and also the statement of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Gabriela Simmerfeld, before the Commission of International Relations of the National Assembly, saying that measures are taken in order to assist migrants that have been sent back as part of the response of the US to clandestine migration. Please provide us with information on practices and complaint mechanisms and access to legal, medical, psychological assistance provided by your embassy or consular services in the United States in order to assist and protect the rights of migrants that have been victims of violence, abuse, exploitation, arrest, detention, or threats of expulsion.
Dans un premier temps, je vais me limiter par...
I just want to ask questions for now on the well-known retornados, the measures that the minister mentioned. What do they consist of and how are they implemented? And thus far, who implements them? The limits thereof, if you've mentioned limits to enforcement, and what has happened to migrants who are expelled and who are taken care of as part of that strategy. I'd understood that the Ecuadorian government offered a $470 US dollar allocation for the first few months. I don't know if that's still in place. Can you tell us how many people this has been given to, what's happened to them, and what are the grants that you mentioned and what do they consist of? Prior to expulsion, because there were 3 stages, of course, before, during, and after, is there any legal support, any social, economic, and medical support during the deportation proceedings? Do you have figures as to the numbers of people in detention in the US and elsewhere? What are the numbers of voluntary returning people? And can you break those down by gender and age? Are there children? Are there women? During the return, please can you tell us what measures are taken to ensure a dignified, safe return for migrants and their families, and describe the host protocol in the case of expulsion proceedings from the United States, deportation proceedings from the US? How is the hosting done? How are people identified? How do you identify vulnerable people, including repatriated women who've been victims of gender-based violence and sexual exploitation? Provision of medical care and detention condition verification mechanisms prior to deportation, and so on. Once in Ecuador, what is your country doing to raise awareness and to inform and to support individuals to reduce or to mitigate their suffering, both physical suffering, social and psychological suffering, with that not to mention the fact that most of them, as has been shown by very many studies, have debt affecting their possibilities of lasting reintegration. They had credit before they left, and so they've come back in debt. In this context, are the measures or programs in place to promote and to encourage them becoming economically empowered, some kind of income earning possibility? What happens to the social networks of those being deported, those who've worked abroad for many years? Are there any bilateral agreements ensuring the exportability of their social rights in terms of transfer of personal effects and their savings? How can they do that? How can they transfer the remittances home, particularly given that the US is the main source of these remittances for migrant workers, followed by Spain and less so Italy? If my data is correct, in 2025, transfers reached a historic record over $7 million. So this is an increase of 18.2% compared to 2024, when it was $6.5 billion. How can you explain that change? Is it linked to the deportations of the deportees who are sending? What's the link? How can you explain that significant jump?
To the Vice Minister and thank him for leading this delegation and for his introductory remarks. I would also like to commend through you all the members of your delegation. For recently having ratified 2 significant conventions of the ILO, one on domestic workers and 190 on violence and harassment in the workplace, and the convention on one of the conventions on workers. I also have additional concerns regarding questions by some of the conventions that were ratified by Ecuador. That are having some stumbling blocks on your path to implementation. One is 87 and 98 on the freedom of association and trade union freedom. Ecuador has adopted relevant instruments for the implementation of this decree 730 of 2023 on combating discrimination, and the 2025 protocol 102 on trade union freedom and freedom of assembly. And that there are, however, some gaps and difficulties in registering with trade unions. There's also issues from protecting trade union leaders from discrimination, in spite of the existence of these decrees. And these are all real concerns. Convention 103 on the protection of motherhood is a relevant convention, and maternity leave for women is an important question because during maternity leave, women do not benefit from all services unless they have made the proper payments ahead of time, which are additionally actually supplementary fees. There's a trend for the state to step in with subsidies or social security agencies to allow women on maternity leave to benefit from the entirety of their treatments. And the current trend is moving towards a hybrid system where state and employers contribute to the social security purse and allowing And so based on that, I wanted to know what measures is the state party taking in order to ensure that trade unions can freely register without any discrimination, that migrant workers can join them and be members of the board of directors, how the state supports social security for women who would be in need of services during their maternity leave. That was the first question. The second question relates to ratification. Does the state plan on ratifying the Convention 155 on security at work, Convention 187 on the framework for health at the workplace, Protocol 29 on labor, Convention 143 on migration, Protocol 81 and 155 on the labor inspection, health, and security in the workplace. And lastly, can the state party give us an idea of the number of labor inspections done in the country? Do these labor inspections cover all the territory? And do they have the necessary means to guarantee their independence and impartiality? These concludes my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Babaka. Mr. Ermal Freshri, you had the floor.
Many thanks, Mr. Chair. I also join my colleagues in extending a very warm welcome to the Ecuadorian delegation. It's a pleasure to have you here. And thank you for having this dialogue with us. So this is a dialogue, it's not an interrogation session. So we'll appreciate very much a frank exchange of discussions and thoughts and ideas and concerns as well. I usually raise this point pretty much every time I attend dialogues with states, which is that the convention lays out a number of commitments, obligations for states, and most of the time, these commitments, obligations also require capacities on the ground, capacities in the state administration, but also in the society and so forth. And so one question and point that I usually raise is that, what kind of challenges do you face in complying with the convention? What kind of new circumstances on the ground materialize? And what can you tell us a little bit about your experience with complying with the convention, as well as also in engaging with us in the committee? So this kind of feedback to us is very much appreciated because we would like to know and learn and inform in what ways we can help states. And another reason why I mentioned why I started with explaining this nature of a dialogue where we exchange ideas and concerns is that we'd like very much to find out ways that we can collaborate and ways that we can support you in your work in complying with conventions. So in that sense, it's very much appreciated any comments you have about challenges that you face, capacities that you need, and ideas that you may have about working with us. So that is one. Secondly, actually, most of the time when it comes to compliance with the convention, state authorities have their part in ensuring compliance, but also, first and foremost, compliance also is ensured by activities of the business sector, the private sector more broadly. Pretty much, overwhelming majority of migrant workers work in the private sector, very few work in the public sector, and so the private sector bears a lot of responsibility in ensuring that migrant workers are treated fairly. And so, one question that sometimes comes up in this context is to see in what ways the government works with the private sector to ensure that the rights of migrant workers are respected. Are there particular mechanisms or platforms, processes that the government uses? And if not, what do you think about that? Any particular plans or ideas that you have on this issue of government business cooperation to ensure that migrant workers' rights are being met by business practices? That's all I have for the moment. Thank you again. I very much look forward to this 2 days of dialoguing with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Moria.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I would also like to congratulate the delegation of Ecuador. Thank them for coming all the way here to Pali Wilson for this interactive dialogue. I cannot call myself an expert on Latin America. I have read about the continent and I know what the press says about the continent. I certainly don't know as much as my colleagues on the other side of the room. Which is why my questions will be general, but I think that they are still relevant questions as they regard your obligations under the treaty. Recently, we learned from the media of the expulsion following a decision of U.S. authorities of migrants, some of whom ended up in countries of which they were not nationals. Did you have any Ecuadorian nationals who ended up elsewhere in another third-party state? And if so, what did your government do in order to assist them? And perhaps find ways of having them return to the country. And what I have learned from hearing several statements is that you're also a country of origin of migration. So are there any provisions taken in order to facilitate the transfer of resources? Because some people go abroad to work for a better living. So domestically in the country, have you made any provisions in order to facilitate the return and resettlement of those that want to come back? And possibilities for them to invest the money that they have saved up. I also would like to know if your country is an active participant in regional human rights mechanisms, such as the Inter-American Human Rights Commission and the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. I would also like to know if you have a national human rights institution, and if so, what is its status? Thank you, Chair. That concludes my questions for the delegation.
Maria. Ms. Tagsad, you had the floor.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I also want to welcome distinguished delegation from Ecuador. And I hope that during our dialogue, we will improve the situation with migrant workers, their families from the Ecuador, and discuss the possibility of solving the problems which we have. For better understanding the situation, the possibilities of government provide support and services for migrant workers from Ecuador, I would to have more exact information about the consular points of Ecuador abroad in the countries where they have the biggest number of Ecuadorian migrant workers flow, and to understanding how they can provide the services for Ecuadorians abroad. It will be very useful if we can provide us with the number of Ecuadorian migrant workers and members of their family who participate in election of government structures of Ecuadorian. In general, can they have the possibility to vote for person in Ecuador if they are abroad, for example? If they can, at least some number, how many of them participate in these elections? Thank you.
Thank you, Tagisade. Before we close this round of questions, I just have one comment or rather inquiry with regard arising out of a comment Your Excellency made. You said you came up with a very interesting idea that your country is implementing digitized map of trafficking, you mentioned. Now, I found it very interesting, and my question will be to expand on that for two reasons. One, it could be a very interesting example for other countries to follow if it is a successful model, and more details as to what you mean by that digitized map of trafficking, and what are the safeguards you have in that. Because if that digitized map goes to the hands of traffickers, then they know what to do. So how are you having firewalls in that? Well, who is using that? What is the purpose? How does that help to prevent trafficking? So it's while it is a very interesting idea, it requires some clarifications as to what it is all about. Especially, suddenly that came to my mind was that will it end up in the hands of traffickers who can then violate very efficiently whatever that's government is trying? So that's a question that, and if it is a successful effort model, there will be other countries who may want to use that as a tool to control trafficking very effectively and very efficiently across the system, so that various agencies involved in that are online on it, so that you can prevent really trafficking. So at some point, so please explain that. Now, I think we have had a good round of questions. What we propose is, Excellency, we will have about 15-20 break for you, during which time you and your delegations can organize responses to the questions. I'm sure some questions you can respond today, other questions we can hear tomorrow. No hurry, we have another full session. And if we have time after your presentation, after you come back from the break, there may be other questions. So we'll continue. So we will.
It was supposed to be a conversatory, not a.
So we will have this dialogue in a manner that so that we both benefit. So I now suspend the meeting for 20 minutes, and you have a room number 1016. Secretariat will show you is reserved for your delegation. and then we will see you in about 20 minutes. Thank you. Thank you.
There's so many questions to be answered.
No issue. You can take.
Thank you very much.
Excellency Pakruku, welcome back. I would now offer the floor to you for your responses and comments. Of course, we recognize that some issues raised may require further consultations on your side, including with the capital. So we can discuss that tomorrow afternoon, those issues. And I give the floor to your comments. Thank you.
All members for your attention to this dialogue. As was mentioned, we're going to try to answer not all, but many of the questions. And those that cannot be answered this afternoon orally, we will attempt to answer in greater detail tomorrow afternoon. So let's begin speaking about remittances. A question that there was about the 7 billion 2026 and what has the government done through its policies on remittances. Consular offices in the United States have been reinforced with a greater number of vulnerability-related issues that, if needed, the government, through the policy on human mobility, means that there has been a reduction in prevention of risky migration. As I mentioned, the Ecuadorians abroad and returned migrants perhaps because of online media, social networks, or how easy it is to have a quick response. So what happens? It's as well for persons deprived of liberty. Preferential care is afforded. And for deported persons, as I said earlier, the state, through the World Food Program, much, they do allow the returned person to buy a phone card, to place a call, or to buy a bus ticket, which would take them back home to their hometown. That wasn't possible before. There's also psychological and social and health support. There are also representatives of the Ministry of Health there at the airport, the point of first entry. Some international organizations, such as the IOM, is present, and then the UNHCR is as well, who can provide assistance if so required. The Ministry of the Interior also They are present and they participate. We have a database with employment offers for all these people coming from abroad, for the deported nationals. And this job database is going to be rolled out this year, and it should be up and running by the end of this year and next year. And this is part of a public policy. And addressing some of the questions you had with agreements with third parties, which was mentioned this afternoon. Since it was implemented to now, we have only had 10 flights with 96 people coming from countries such as Venezuela, Cuba, Honduras. The agreement only allows and this request is considered and analyzed once they arrive at the country. When the people come to our country, they already have an asylum request. They have undergone a medical exam. Their criminal record is reviewed. On the protocols and the consular network, the state service from May 2024, and so far it has been used for 1,067,000 people. We also have an institutional chat system, which addresses the overflow from phone calls. And by May 11th, over 1,300,000 and 2,000 visas, regular visas, were granted, and 2,297 diplomatic visas. And this is from July 2024. We have the legal electronic apostille system, 1,122,554 public records have received an apostille since July 2024. Now, what does this all mean? It means that it's part of a public policy of the current government. By digitizing our services, we are allowing our consular officers to have a lot more time to address the needs of the Ecuadorians that go in person to the consular offices due to vulnerability or human mobility related issues. So by digitizing our services, we are freeing up a lot of time for our consular staff so that they can devote their energy to other consular services of great importance. And as part of the contingency plan to receive migrants, the government of Ecuador, through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, drafted a contingency plan aimed at providing assistance and consular protection to our fellow nationals within the limits established in US and Ecuador regulations. As well as an international law. The contingency plan program developed by the Foreign Affairs Ministry in collaboration with the Ministry of Labor oversees the labor conditions of Ecuadorians that participate in the program from its early stages. And once they have been chosen, and as a required prerequisite for the visa, the workers must sign on to the previously established contracts, which must provisions of the Ministry of Inclusion, Social Security, and Migration, which sets out the general guidelines for hiring foreign workers who paying of their trip, full respect for contractual obligations, and the right to receive all relevant information in a language that they can fully understand. And once the workers arrive at the country of destination, the diplomatic offices of Ecuador follow up on them about what is being done for migration. Well, this public policy as I just read, is a public asked this about high-risk migration. Well, so with this I have just talked about, the Ecuadorians no longer need to incur debt. They're and it is a thing. Oftentimes they come from a rural community. Oftentimes they haven't even left their hometown, and they are for the first time traveling across oceans from one continent to another. Case with Spain, they can go to Spain and then come back for 4 years in a row. So we're talking about a different type of migration. So we're not banning migration, but we're allowing it to take place in a safe, orderly, and regular way. Prevail over national documents. The Ecuadorian legal system operates under constitutional guidelines that ensure the full validity of individuals. And the rights enshrined in the Constitution, as well as those found in international human rights instruments, including the Constitution, are enforceable right away. There can be no reason for violating the rights. This guarantees municipalities and professional networks pro bono. Consular offices provide advisor on social welfare, on having an equivalent six, 135 different workshops on advice have been organized. We all have further efforts for working holiday and consular support also includes community integration efforts, which try to preserve cultural identity to improve social cohesion. And these events improve community participation and the sense of belonging for Ecuadorians abroad. These initiatives show a unified consular services system and sustained progress in the social, economic, and cultural includes mobile units and online services. So far in 2026, 130,102 users benefited from these services. Were from people coming from China, Equatorial Guinea, Vietnam, Iran, Chile, the Dominican Republic, and others. Overall, on non-criminal matters, that was 55.07%. This was the area in which the gender of the user, men, consistently asked for assistance more, 11,037 2021, 14,900 the greatest number of those asking for assistance, 106,079 cases overall. We also note a progressive increase in assistance provided by children and adolescents, going from 323 requests for assistance in 2021 to 856 in 2025. Cache, 12,000 some, and Locache, 13,845. Assistance for Ecuadorians abroad, addressing the increase of the immigration. Who need legal services in Ecuador. Becoming a system providing access to justice without territorial barriers. Between September and December 2020, the first quarter of 2026, there were 55 requests for assistance. 54 of them were advisory, and one was legal representation. Between to provide assistance for people on the move. Regarding geographic distribution, most of the requests came from 20. We see that most of them related to family matters, children, and adolescents. 56 cases for this area, followed by criminal affairs, of migrant children. The State Party, in keeping with Article 424, recognizes the supremacy of international human rights treaties that have been ratified by the country and how which led to the constitutionality of the organic law and human mobility, cited Articles 29, 28 of the Convention. Article 29 guarantees the right of children on due process, and revoking nationality also quoted Article 29, in addition to Article 16 of the Convention, which for its part recognizes the right to freedom the nationality of migrants, foreigners, addressed Article 29 of the Convention, the right to name, registration, and nationality, and Article 28, medical care, linking its compliance to eradicating practical obstacles (14 97-20-JP) /21 protects the right to education of a migrant girl, combating ruling 212/20/EP/24 laid out the obligations of the state of transit for their entry and protection, citing though it mentions the Constitution in its Article 41, as well as the concept of jus cogens, and it applies the principles that underpin Article 18 of due process
documents or academic background or case files. The Ministry of Education seeks to ensure the right to access, inclusion, constant continuity of education, particularly for those in vulnerable situations, such NEDUC 2026-001A, which governs administrative and pedagogical procedures for access to the national education system. Through the process that implements actions to promote comprehensive areas of focus on advice, promotion, prevention, and to ensure that the process is ongoing. There are various programs implemented eradicate violence and to prevent psychosocial risk and to prevent violence as well as child labor. We also have provided training to almost to over 48,000 professionals in the educational level across in called contact, listening, acting, and education in values and rights, as well as managing teams for internal collaboration and participation being a right in education. We've also provided psychosocial support for teachers and for professionals in the student advice departments. There have been 2,127 users registered. Similarly, we have developed action plans with UNHCR methodology, toolboxes, allies for a possible world in 9 zones, 140 districts, and 1,708 priority schools. We've had an impact on over 4 million students, 4,322,000 138 individual students through to April 2025. These actions have gone hand in hand with specific programs and protocols, such as our National Plan on Coexistence, the Interministerial Project to Prevent Risky Migration, and guidance for coexistence to prevent and address discrimination and racism in the national education system. When it comes to validating studies, Article 175 of the Regulation of the Law on Education and the Ministerial Agreement from Mineduc 2024-00087A from the 18th of December 2024, these prioritize verification of documentation through digital mechanisms to recognize studies that have been conducted and harmonizing degree qualifications, facilitating their incorporation into the national education system. Then we turn now to comprehensive care for boys, girls, and adolescents, who, as well as psychosocial, socio-emotional support and pedagogical levels. Let me give some data on access of children and adolescents from other nationalities. Between 2021 and 2022, it was 87,365. Between 2022 and 2023, it was 80,074. Between 2023 and 2024, it was 75,229. Between 2024 and 2025, it was 65,201. Between 2025 and 2026, it was 59,137 children and adolescents from other nationalities who access that education system.
En materia laboral, la Constitución.
On labour, the constitution of our country recognizes particular protection for Ecuadorians on the move and establishes that the state shall develop actions to ensure their rights and to facilitate their return and social reintegration and economic reintegration. Similarly, the Organic Law on Human Mobility recognizes returned Ecuadorians as a particular group for priority attention and ensures their socio and economic inclusion. However, Ecuadorian legislation does not cover a particular general validation of inputs that have been undertaken abroad or studies undertaken abroad. There's no validation formally. In this context, the state itself recognizes as one of the benefits for returned migrants access to a retirement pension and mechanisms of economic and social inclusion. Therefore, from a legal perspective, we can conclude that the possibility of recognizing contribution periods abroad depends on international agreements on social security that are relevant between Ecuador and the country where the contributions were made. The returned migrant may request recognition of their temporary rights in line with procedures established in those agreements and the Ecuadorian Institution for Social Security. And within the constitutional and legal framework in Ecuador, we've adopted various measures to ensure equal treatment and labour protection for migrants. These include the equality of rights between nationals and foreigners. This was developed by our Organic Law on Human Mobility, which guarantees the exercise of rights and equal conditions for those in situation of human mobility. Let me turn now to B, right to social and economic inclusion of returned migrants. The Organic Law on Human Mobility expressly recognizes the right of returned Ecuadorians to inclusion, social inclusion and economic inclusion. The state is obliged to implement affirmative action measures to facilitate their reintegration in the country. The measures implemented would include harmonization, validation and recognition of studies conducted abroad, harmonization and certification for labor skills that have been acquired outside of the country, access to training programs and empowerment, access to the national financial system, programs of labor inclusion, and productive programs for returned persons. The Ministry of Labour issued instructions for foreign migrant workers. The aim is that the labour rights of those working in Ecuador should be verified and labour inspection mechanisms shall be strengthened. This instrument obliges public and private employers to register their migrant workers and permits the labour authorities to conduct checks on wages, hours worked, and other labour rights. The Ministry of Labour, to verify that there have not been violations of the rights of workers, implement periodic labour inspections through the labour inspectors, and they follow a procedure that is governed by the Ministerial Agreement number MDT 2023-140 that governs the oversight and monitoring of the employer's obligations and the inspection procedures. It also complies with the regulatory role in terms of providing training between 2020 and April 2026, 8,293 specialized inspections were conducted on health and safety in the workplace and 83,544 labor inspections at the national level. These strengthen protection mechanisms of the rights of workers. And in this context, from 2023 to April 2026, 83,544 labor inspections were conducted according to the following details. In 2020, there were 10,400. In 2021, there were 12,789. In 2022, there were 9,996. In 2023, there were 13,871. In 2024, there were 14,530. In 2025, there were 70,309. And between January and April 2026, there were 4,649 labour inspections. In addition, to respond to some of the other questions put on voting abroad is not compulsory, it's an option, it's optional. However, in collaboration with the National Electoral Council and the Ministry for Foreign Affairs and Human Mobility, this has been coordinated so that the ballot papers and so on be transferred in a timely manner so that those who are abroad the elections can take place the same day as those people can vote abroad at the same day as those who vote in Ecuador. The members of the board tend to be voluntary. They're part of the Ecuadorian migrant community, and they receive some kind of a per diem for their participation the day of the elections. If you just give me a few seconds, I can give you the for over 471,000, that's the number of those people who are registered to vote abroad. This on the possibility of voting abroad. And another figure that I want to share with you the number of deportees from 2019 to 2026. In 2023, it reached 18,449 Ecuadorians deported. In 2024, it was 13,681. In 2025, 9,434. And through to April 2026, we have 4,395, which means that the number of deportees from 2023, which is when the peak was, of almost 20,000 citizens deported, that has been falling significantly since then. I also wanted to share data on irregular migration. Ecuadorians found by the Border Patrol of the United States with a cutoff of the 25th of May 2026. In 2023, we had 125,151 Ecuadorians. Ecuadorians in an irregular situation in Mexico from the National Mexican Institute, cut off May 2026. In 2023, we had 70,453. In 2024, it was 110,000. In 2025, 9,608, and just 171 between January and March 2026. Ecuadorians in transit through the Darien Gap from the Panama Migration Stats Institute. In 2022, it was 29,356. In 2023, around 53,000. In 2024, 16,576. In 2025, 133. And in 2026, just 24. This to answer the question regarding the public policies when it comes to migration that the government has been implementing to date. Now, I think that covers the questions that we're able to answer today. We've noted down all of the other questions, and we'll be able to continue answering them tomorrow afternoon with more information. I think that on the stats that you'd asked us for as the first rapporteur, I hope that we have answered, if not all of them, then the majority of perhaps we've given you a better overview of what's actually happening and the impact of the public policies implemented and the statistics. As the two rapporteurs rightly said, stats don't lie, the figures don't lie. And of course, that doesn't cover everything, but with the digitization and the mobile units that we've implemented and the consular offices as well, but in the specific issues that affect Ecuador and the whole region in terms of migration, there are also sources from outside the country. So hopefully we've given you a better picture. As you said, you have a particular view, and it's necessary that Ecuador, through its institutions, through her institutions,
Your Excellency, I thank you for your energy, and which is manifested by your commitment for presenting the responses by yourself without delegating it to your experts. You took the
if I may, this is a teamwork. It's not only me. I'm just the voice. I have a great team here next to me, and also in Ecuador. Just so it's not me the one that gets the credit. But sorry for the interruption.
we will expect more responses, more comments tomorrow to other issues that has been raised. We have little more time left. I wonder whether rapporteurs want to follow up. So I will give the floor to Sharif to use the rest of the time productively so that we can make our dialogue more constructive tomorrow. Thank you. Sharif, you have the floor.
Monsieur le Président, je me joins.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would echo your words in warmly thanking the Deputy Minister, not only for his energy, but also for the quality of the figures he's given us. We'd have liked to see them in the report, but it's, I'm not wedded to figures, but it is important to have them. It's also interesting to hear your responses to this first round. That's helped us definitely to get a better picture of the broad brushstrokes of the situation in your country, to measure the scope of the different programs implemented, and to really assess and better understand the goals that you've set yourselves to ensure protection of the people on the move. Now, I would have 3 or 4 brief questions. We don't have an awful lot of time. Firstly, is a little bit direct, if I may. What happens to non-Ecuadorian deportees that Ecuador has accepted and who have absolutely no links to Ecuador and who sometimes don't even speak Spanish? What happens to them coming from the US with the agreement that there's been? I think, do I have to be quick, Chair? Do you need me to go quickly? I don't want to go into too much detail, but okay. Secondly, second question is on the vulnerability of migrant women. Ecuador is a state party to all clear human rights treaties, and that we should hail. Moreover, it would seem, correct me if I'm wrong, that you are the first country in Latin America to give the right to vote to women, to have given the right to vote to women. I think it was in 1929. I think you're the first country in Latin America to do that, unless I'm mistaken. But despite the notable progress and the the most serious of these problems, and you've mentioned it very briefly in passing, but judging by the information, the data, and the witnessing that we've heard, violence against migrant women, as defined and adopted in the UNGA Declaration in 1993 on elimination of violence against women, it's very, very difficult. The report on the field visit of the Board of UN Women in 2022, while recognizing that your government continues to demonstrate political will to bring about positive change, nonetheless, it states that women are constantly exposed to poverty, to inequalities and multifaceted inequalities. The report highlights that 3 out of 4 women are unemployed. Those who are in work are also victims of salary, wage discrimination, labor conditions, access to social security, and these are primarily, this report stresses, rural, indigenous, Afro-Ecuadorian and migrant women and children and girls, and the displaced who have suffered from these forms of segregation. Now, there are figures in there, which I won't go to, but almost 90% of those coming from Venezuela. 55% of them are women. Most of these women are aged between 18 and 59. They have problems, socioeconomic integration problems, facing exacerbated risk, but they often don't have access to justice because they are often in an irregular situation. Same as sexual violence is considered to be one of the main factors behind the high rates of violence. You do have a high rate of teenage pregnancy in Ecuador. It would seem 63.6 thousand girls. It makes you 3rd in the region in terms of a teenage adolescent pregnancy. The report also highlights that 137 adolescents between 15 and 19 and 5 girls under 14 give birth every day, which is very high. Similarly, you mentioned children very briefly. I have 2 very brief questions on children. I'm talking primarily about children coming back with their parents. I don't know what you do to support children where the parents have been deported. I talked about that earlier, all the measures that have been in place, but also children. You have another phenomenon that I can't go into in detail. Perhaps I can come back to it tomorrow if you like. You have a high number of women leaving their children in their country. The children grow up without their children. Since the agreement that you have put in place with Spain that you touched upon, what happens to these children? What do you do for these children living far from their mothers that is problematic. What measures have you taken? I don't need to go into detail now. If you need me to talk to you tomorrow. In the meantime, civil society is very active in a series of areas for children, for women and others, and there have been many projects launched to help them, to support, guide them, talk about women. However, following the crisis that international cooperation is experiencing, and civil society in Ecuador, like others, they're going through very difficult times. Many resources that they previously had access to, and I'm always using the conditional tense in French because I want you to correct my perception. As I say, correct me if I'm wrong. It would seem that because of the drastic fall in humanitarian aid and the exponential growth of needs, particularly with the return of those deported from the US, if you're working in these areas, working on migration, what are the resources allocated by the state to support them and to facilitate adequate conditions to help them work calmly? What is your state doing to help civil society continue to undertake their missions in safe conditions, in safe
You have about 4 minutes. Okay, go ahead, please.
Maybe I can reply.
Gracias.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to, I don't have much time. I just wanted to list the topics. Abuse and crimes against migrants, and the fact that we haven't had information that you didn't receive information from the relevant authorities. So there was also xenophobia and racism in generic terms against the migrant population. And then I wanted to hear about xenophobia and racism against Venezuelan women in particular. Another to international treaties and the Constitution and the direct application and the reference that the Vice Minister made, as well as data and collection of data, the statistical centralized system, the disaggregated data on migration and other issues related to that data, and the efforts of Sí Derechos. It's a platform called Sí Derechos, and their efforts and their recommendations and the outcome of international recommendations. It's also training on the convention, our convention, regardless of its applicability, which was flagged here in various cases. There was also the question of Articles 17. So the closure of border control points and the capacity of the NHRI. And lastly, some questions on enforced disappearance, trafficking, birth registration, and refuge and asylum seeking. Thank you. That's everything, Chair.
Thank you. Experts team for making this presentation to enhance our constructive dialogue, and to efficient rapporteurs and my colleagues for their comments, questions. And we will continue with discussion on the periodic report of the State Party tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow afternoon, we will continue at 3 p.m. our constructive dialogue with the Republic of Ecuador. And we expect the dialogue quality to improve as we go by tomorrow. And then tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., the committee will consider the second periodic report of Ghana, just to remind our colleagues. Meeting is adjourned. Have a good evening, sir.
Thank you, sir.
you.